And I went to the cardiologist one day because I had heart palpitations. I just couldn't seem to control. I'm a pretty fit person. I work out, regularly. I sleep well, I eat well. I don't drink a lot of alcohol. And I'm thinking here, I'm the resilience expert, I'm up on my pedestal and thinking, my ego got in the way of recognizing something might be off. And she was very kind and she said, how's your stress? And here I am, of course, leading with ego. Oh, I'm fine.
Lauren, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I'm really delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm looking forward to the conversation. It's a very topical conversation that we're about to have. So,
isn't it always?
Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small and medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Lauren, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
I loved that question. And I mean, the company is called Performance on Purpose for a very intentional reason. To me, scaling with purpose is clarity and alignment to your values and what's most important to you. And you don't have a process of regular reflection and check-in on your values and your own personal life's purpose and then your organizational purpose, I think you can get quickly off course. And so I think it's just, that's probably my initial response was just having clarity in these areas of what's most important, what do you value most, and how are you regularly aligned to it? What process do you have to regularly reflect on it? I think a level up to that is, can you connect your values and purpose to your organizational mission and purpose? And if you can do that, I think it's that integration can be a really special kind of level up.
Yeah, it was Adam Kingle I had on the podcast said that's when you create this golden thread. So it's ultimately the holy grail of what we want all of our leaders listening to do within their organization to connect that organizational purpose with the personal purpose of everyone within their team. Speaking of purpose, we met, and I'm delighted that we met through a wonderful human, Dr. Jim Lear, somebody who I absolutely revere. You've had the privilege of working with Dr. Jim through his work through the Human Performance Institute. We know, and regular listeners to the podcast will certainly know of Dr. Jim Lear's background. Can you share a little bit of your own backstory and what led you to write this wonderful book I'm holding up for those listening not be able to see this? Less stress, more calm. And who doesn't want that? Discover your unique stress personality and make it your superpower.
Yeah, thank you for plugging the book. I so appreciate that. What led me to it? So I have a kind of varied background in well-being, exercise, fitness, but I've been in the industry of human performance for about probably going on 17 years now, which is, every time I say it out loud, feels wild to me. I started out as a freelance consultant. So I have these kind of dual subject matter expertise in exercise sciences, well-being, human performance sciences, and then also in learning sciences. That's sort of my academic training, is in experiential learning and curriculum design. So I spent the early parts of my career freelancing and building courses and learning experiences in the field of human performance. And that's how I was very lucky and fortunate to meet Dr. Lear and Dr. Grapple of the Human Performance Institute, because they brought me on board to help renovate the course, The Corporate Athlete, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and then help them kind of co-design their resilience course. From there, I worked for Thrive Global, Arianna Huffington's company. I helped them build 2 of their flagship courses, and I worked with Accenture, and I even still today work with Estee Lauder companies. I absolutely love what they're doing. They were HPI's longest standing client of 30 years. And so when HPI kind of went internal, they needed something to be built. All of this to say, in 2019, I decided to take the leap and co-founded Performance on Purpose. It's the same essence of Human Performance Institute, coaching, training services. We also have digital on demand, but we moved a little bit away from energy management. That is the theory that we still teach. we're trying to carry on Jim and Jack's legacy, but also we do work in stress sciences and resilience work, and we do work in connection. The way that I got connected to this book and all of this was actually through a course I was building in partnership with Thrive Global, a course called Thriving Mind. We were partnered with Stanford Medicine and Accenture, and we were taking a really deep dive into the mental health space and the neuroscience of mental health with a wonderful theorist, a neuroscientist, and psychologist there. Her name was Dr. Leanne Williams of Stanford. And we were taking a lot of her work and interpreting it and building a digital mental well-being course called Thriving Mind, which actually went on to become the most popular course in Accenture's company history. It was launched March 2020, just sort of took off. All of that to say that I fell in love with the research of stress neurosciences. And I just took a deeper and deeper dive after that project was done. And I thought, this is important information that needs to be out there. So I took a big leap of faith by writing a book, and I'm excited to say it's going to be released April 2nd of this year.
Well, I love this book. You come at stress and the whole topic of stress management from a very different perspective. So I'm highly praiseworthy of you for doing that. So what I'd love to do today is a little mini masterclass on all things stress and how we can
Sure.
how we can turn that and leverage that as a superpower. This will resonate with all of our leaders. We've all experienced stress at different points in our journey to date, and certainly in the context of scaling, you will deal with stress. And certainly our approach is leading self first before you lead others, before you lead an organization, and actually practicing getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. But rather than kind of making assumptions as to what stress is, let's kick off. What do you interpret stress as? How do you define stress?
Stress is just, it's not good nor bad. It's a neutral biological, psychological, physiological reaction to our environment, right? To either a real or perceived threat in our environment. Now, we have real threats to our environment, of course. You walk in front of a car or you walk into a spider web, that's a real threat to your survival, or at least your brain thinks so. Perceived threats is what I think all of us, and I say us because I'm in that same space of trying to build and scale a business leaders, entrepreneurs, we experience day in and day out. These perceived threats are all around us. And they're environmental, they're psychological, they're threats that are external, and they're threats that we manifest ourselves, just pressures and demands. Stress is a good thing. It helps us grow. It motivates us. It helps us rise to an occasion. It alerts us to something being off, and something needing to be tweaked or adjusted in our environment. The way that stress becomes what we in our world perceive it to be is sort of negative connotation. High negative stress is the way I would categorize it, is when we allow stress to become cumulative and unmanaged or unchecked, when we stop feeling in control of it. So when we start feeling like our circumstances are out of our control, when we fail to recover effectively or efficiently, and also when our mindset is off, again, when we perceive something to be a threat or stressful to us, when really it could be something that we could reframe. I think those are 4 ways that stress starts to become something chronic or something that can have a negative impact in our life. Some of those variables are highly controllable. They're in our control to manage. But sometimes I think we get in such a busy way in our life that we stop actually taking that 30,000 foot view and looking at where are there areas that I could actually mitigate some of this or reduce some of the stressors in my life from even occurring if I was just designing my personal and professional life and operations and systems a little bit differently. So I know that goes a little bit off the topic of what exactly is stress, but I think it's just such a big, heavy word in our world, and not one that I think we should be afraid of. Stress is what we do when we exercise, right? I mean, it's neither good nor bad. It's a lot of the ways of how we look at it and manage it that has a negative impact in our world.
Well, let's just explore that a little bit further before we get into how we can leverage stress as a superpower. I resonated strongly with your story about going to the doctor and the doctor suggesting that you might be feeling stress, and you're like, no, I'm not. I'm fine. I'm balancing all of these things, but I'm good.
Yeah.
And that might be worth, just for context, to share a little bit of that with our listeners, and then if you can articulate what the signs of chronic stress might look like. So I know you've given kind of the broad labels and the areas in which it might manifest, but for those listening who may not necessarily appreciate that they're experiencing this cumulative chronic type stress, it will be worth actually clarifying what that is. But I think to give it a little bit of context, it might be worth sharing that story, which you share in the book.
Yeah, so just for context, I have two teenage boys. My husband has a pretty demanding position as a CFO in a hospital system in Orlando area in Florida. We're busy, we have a lot going on. Boys are in sports, all that. And I'm running this business, and it is a global business. It's about 20 people across the United States and beyond, in Asia Pacific and in Europe, et cetera. All that to say, life is great. And I went to the cardiologist one day because I had heart palpitations. I just couldn't seem to control. I'm a pretty fit person. I work out, regularly. I sleep well. I eat well. I don't drink a lot of alcohol. And I'm thinking here, I'm the resilience expert, I'm up on my pedestal and thinking, my ego got in the way of recognizing something might be off. And she was very kind, and she said, how's your stress? And here I am, of course, leading with ego. Oh, I'm fine. I manage it well. Look, I meditate. Look at all these boxes I check. And she really put it in perspective for me that I think we misperceive sometimes resilience with what we think we're checking those boxes off. We think we're being resilient. Sometimes we're actually just ignoring the signs of high chronic negative stress. And my heart was literally responding to the fact that I was not managing as effectively as I thought I was. And it did force me to stop and pause and reevaluate. Going back to it, my first response to your first question, what does it mean to scale with purpose, is regular reflection and check-in. And I realized I really wasn't probably taking as good of care of my mental well-being as much as I could, and my physical body was responding to that. And I had to wear a monitor for a month or two, and I had to really look at how I was designing my life, and I had to integrate more intentional recovery into my day, even more than I thought I needed, which was really just daily pauses. It actually caused me, and I could talk about this later, but to completely reformat my calendar and how I was managing calls, meetings, trips, all of those things, which was great. Had a really great a positive impact. All that to say that how do we recognize these things in our life? I think one of the ways that we can do that is by checking in with ourselves physically. What is the quality and quantity of our sleep? What's the quality and quantity of our relationship time? So we can be at dinner every night with the family, but are we really there? That's what I mean by quality and quantity. How well are you able to check in and check out of business life, which is extremely, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but extremely hard to do when you are running the business, particularly if you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, when everything falls on your shoulders. It's really hard to mentally and emotionally be present with the people and things that really matter to us. And so that's another kind of pulse check. If you have it in you to ask for feedback and you're brave enough to hear what people have to say, asking for feedback from the VIPs in your life is another way that you can collect that data. I'm a big fan of data. I have a Whoop watch. I have an Apple Watch. I'm constantly checking in. There you go. With all of that, the metrics for me, and those are quantifiable metrics like sleep quality, but also qualitative metrics like checking in with my husband or checking in with my friends or my children, and just making sure that I have all of those areas checked off. If that answers your question, that is a way that I regularly now, because of that experience, check in with myself is collecting that data on a regular basis. It's actually part of my regular routine to have those reflective processes in place every so often, just a quick pulse check of how am I showing up? And am I still aligned, with what matters?
You outline in the book a formula for growth, which you've already alluded to the importance of recovery. Just share with our listeners what that formula is before we get super practical about and tactical about how we kind of manage our mental, emotional, physical, kind of spiritual states.
Sure. So if I could back up for a moment, because I don't think that I've been clear about what the book is about. It's not necessarily just about stress and the biology of stress. It's about the idea, not an idea, the validated research that we are all uniquely wired to show up very differently under stress. That's a really important, that's the entire crux of the book, is that our thought patterns, emotional patterns, behavioral patterns are all very different for a number of reasons. The way that we had stress modeled for us as children, the way that we were raised, our culture, our geography, our DNA, all of these things are how we've handled stress in the past, our work environments in the past, relationships, current, past, and present, all of that shapes and molds a unique stress personality that we all bring to the table, a default when we experience stress, where you and I go first and most often, is probably a little bit different based on this idea of neuroplasticity and the patterns that we have created and reinforced over the years. So I just want to put that out there because that answers our question next. The growth formula is not mine. I want to be clear. This is research that calls back to Dr. Jim Loehr and Dr. Jack Grapple of the Human Performance Institute. This is theory that I brought into the book because it really changed my world and the way that I look at stress. And what they said was, and I'll tie those two thoughts together. What they said was, it's not the stress that's the problem. It is so important for all of us to understand. It's stress in the absence of recovery that is where we start to experience negative stress. So the growth formula is stress plus recovery equals growth. Stress plus recovery equals growth. That is the kind of ticket. And when we have intentional, strategic, effective, efficient recovery integrated into our days, then we can really start to experience the same stressors as growth. So to tie those two ideas together, if more recovery, not necessarily more volume, but more strategic, effective, efficient recovery in our day is how we can start to leverage a lot of the stressors and demands that we face as growth. How we recover is going to be very different based on how we experience stress, our stress personality. So Brendan, for example, I'm a runner. I like to avoid. I don't like confrontation. When things get hard, I am the first person to contemplate closing the business and running away and just, giving up. But you might not be that way. Let's say, for example, you're a warrior. You're just going to spin in circles. You're going to ruminate. You're going to anticipate. You're going to feel that type of anxiety, where I'm going to feel the type of anxiety that feels more like overwhelm. And I want to put my head in the sand like an ostrich. So how we recover from that same experience, it could be the same meeting we were in, the same news we received, is going to be very different. And I know we'll get into it, but that also is very important from a leadership perspective, to know that two people can experience the same thing differently. So to go back to it, how we recover is very different. How we show up and experience stress is very different. But the universal formula is that we all need recovery. We need tools in the tool belt for when we're in a moment of stress, but also how we design our days and our weeks and our calendars to integrate these principles and practices is very important as well, so that we can get ahead of it and not experience stress in the first place.
This resonates so strongly with so many of the different guests that I've had on the show. One that springs to mind is the wonderful Jamil Qureshi, and Jamil has coached high-performing athletes across lots of different disciplines and executives across the globe. He had the privilege of getting to work alongside the NASA astronauts in the
Mm.
context of their performance in high stress environments. And when I posed the question to him about what was it that they were doing, that us mere mortals don't tend to do, he said they recover actively. They practice recovery. They recover more than he has seen in any other discipline, and
Mm.
they perceive that simply that aspect of recovery as part of their training program. So we've teased the listeners, and I know you've referenced a number of the stress personalities there, the runner and the warrior, and we'll get into those in a little moment. But I'd love for you to share with us, because I'm fascinated with this. I have the aura. I practice meditation. I became a Wim Hof method instructor. I exercise regularly. All of these things. It is a challenge, I have to say, to kind of turn the volume down inside the head. So I'm really curious, and I'm going to indulge myself here as to some of the tactical ways that we can and should recover, especially those ways that you feel are typical for business leaders working in really busy, stressful environments, and what you've seen, um, without there being magic bullets, but what you've seen to be really successful given the work that you do, Lauren.
hmm Yeah, so there are some universal strategies I think we all at this point generally know to be true, based not just based on the research, but just it's out there all the time. The top contenders, there's the big five, right? Nutrition, exercise and movement, sleep. Those are huge, right? I mean, we talk about them all the time. We sort of know them to be true. Another one is connection with others. Just there's so much evidence that meaningful connection with others is just, time spent, quality spent, good friends, good confidants, advisors. Um, though I will say, some of us more than others maybe need that at different times, right? The runner doesn't necessarily want to call someone right away, where the warrior might. And then meditation is just universally, there's just so much literature on it that we know that it works. But here's where things to me get very interesting: the type of meditation. And like I said, the timing of some of these strategies is very different for different people. Everybody knows we need, well, I mean, everybody knows, I shouldn't say that, but we know that, for example, sleep is sort of universal: 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, quality sleep per night, healthy, nutritious foods, and regular exercise. But then you get a little nuanced with things like meditation, and I'll give you a good example of that. We have to understand how we show up in order to effectively intervene for ourselves. And it doesn't take, to your point about the astronauts, I don't think that it's, large chunks of your day or week that need to be dedicated to recovery. Although I will say, protecting time for exercise and sleep, I think those are large, fiercely protected boundaries you should have. But it only takes a few moments to practice mindfulness or meditation, or take a quick walk or a stretch, or walk away from your screens, or whatever it is. But the type of activity that you choose should really match the stress personality. And for example, if I have, I'll give you me, because this is my head. When I'm really overwhelmed and my instinct or my default is to just back up and go, oh, forget it, and stick my head in the sand, and I don't want to deal with this, it's because my head is full of a lot of noise. I can overthink quite a bit, not like a worrier though. I have so much in my head, and I get into the brain science of why that's a little bit different than a worrier. I'm not worried about the future or the past. I just have all of my to-dos front and center, and it gives me a lot of anxiety. If you asked me to go do a guided meditation in that moment, I would throw the phone back at you. I would say, absolutely not. There's one more person telling me something to do in this moment, or talking to me. I need something unstructured. And I really like movement. It works for me. It's cathartic. So I like to take a walk with no devices. Thankfully, in Florida, we have a lot of good sunshine and things. So I'm walking around outside, and I'm just getting a little bit of the nature. Sometimes I have my shoes off and I'm grounding, in the grass. But if you're I'm not tagging you as a worrier. I'm just using it as an example. If you're a worrier and your head is spinning and you're anticipating the future and you're worried about the past and the what ifs and what happens and you just can't, you're stuck. You're having trouble being in the present moment because you're stuck in the past or future. If I go tell you to be alone with your thoughts on an unstructured walk, what are you going to do? You know, your head is gonna, you're just going to worry some more. So a guided meditation may be a really useful recovery strategy for you. And that would ground you back to the present moment. There's cues in there, examples. So that's why I say it gets a little bit nuanced as to what recovery strategies work best for what person. And even within the stress personalities, there's not a one-to-one, you know, this one should definitely always do this. It's just getting to know. The whole book intention is just an awareness building activity and exercise and reflective process where you get to know what are my unique experiences of stress and what really helps me intervene the most. Another one for me that is very important is calendar management. I think universally for all stress personalities, that's a universal truth. But I know that it really prevents the runner coming out. For me, when I have predictability in my schedule, it's very helpful for me. I don't do well with quick shifts in the schedule. So unexpected twists and turns. Not that any of us do, but you know, some of us do, but not me. I don't know if
I,
that answers your question.
it really does. Yeah, I'm smiling here because I think if we examine our DNA, I think we're related somewhere along the way here because everything you're saying resonates so, so strongly. I couldn't advocate more strongly for people to use the likes of Microsoft Office to manage their
Mm,
calendar, to give them that level of predictability and certainty to a degree, which I think uncertainty in our lives can create high levels of anxiety, but wonderful tools like Microsoft Calendar. Calendly, for me, in the context of organizing the podcast, for example, has been an absolute revelation.
mm-hmm,
So it's removed so much of the uncertainty around scheduling and timings, all of those good things. And the five pillars, I think of things in acronyms, and I've always thought of what makes good sense to me, sense being the acronym for sleep, exercise, nutrition, self-care. I put meditation under self-care, and
mm,
environment. I put the hanging out with people you want to hang out with, those radiators rather than those drains. So for me,
mm-hmm.
I use that acronym, which I keep coming back to in terms of what makes good sense for me in my life in the context of what we're doing here. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so everything everything that you're saying uh, speaks directly to me, I have to say, but there are nine personalities as you've defined, albeit you're careful within the book to say, look, this may not cover everyone, given the uniqueness of everyone out there, but can you can you share with our listeners, give an overview, Lauren, of those stress personalities, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper into some of those. I'll take your direction on this as the ones that you feel will be most relevant to our business leaders listening, and then how we can kind of leverage those as superpowers. So share with us. You've mentioned a few already, but share with us those stress personalities.
Sure, absolutely. There's actually eight. Although there could be more. You know, there's I've had actually had seven at one point, and then someone came up to me after a keynote and said, "I think you're missing one." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, you're exactly right." So I encourage that. I mean, this is not a validated tool or science. You know, this is just my experience based on my clients and what I know to be evident in the literature. And so just giving that qualifier that if you don't see yourself in there, whatever, you know,
Sure.
you might have your own unique stress
And
personality.
I'm just glad I left the finance profession because I thought there were nine. So,
No, you're fine. And there's also I say it and kind of there's a whole chapter on sort of some rules here, but it's not that the point is not to box ourselves into one. These are context dependent too. I mean, how we are at work might be different than how we are at home. So I want to be careful to qualify this with that. But it's really meant to be fun and lighthearted and just a way to sort of see if you can see your patterns. Where you go first and most often is very important because, I mean, I think we can experience all 8 of these stress personalities in a matter of 60 seconds on a bad day, right? So it's where do we go first and most often? What's the pattern? Again, back to the data. I'm a big fan of collecting data in our own lives. So the first one is the fighter. That's the one, as you can probably imagine, physiology is big for them. They experience their stress in a very high negative way. They can tend to be, I want to say tend to be combative or blaming or explosive or get angry quickly or whatever it might be. Before I even go on, all of these stress personalities, these are not personalities to be conquered or fixed. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just how we experience stress. And there are really interesting and unique skills that we have developed. Call them self-preservation skills if you want, but they're skills nonetheless. And I call them superpowers that are embedded in each of these. So for a fighter, for example, people tend to see people who are really combative and quick triggered and irritable and all of that as oh, they don't have self-control. Well, they actually tend to be very values driven, very quick on their feet, very action focused. And I really appreciate that about them because, as you know, I'm the flight in fight or flight. The runner is very different, right? Where a fighter goes toward the threat, the runner goes away. We avoid it. That's our tactic is avoid. And they tend to withdraw and they tend to feel overwhelmed in that way. We have the worrier. That's the one who's running really fast, but going absolutely nowhere. So they're not fight, they're not flight, they're sort of just stuck in that, spinning hamster wheel of worry, rumination, and anticipation. Then we have the freezer. The freezer can experience stress 2 different ways, I think. And I do think that a lot of our listeners on this podcast in particular might resonate with this. I say that carefully only to say that there's a lot of driven, maybe type A, like me, personalities out there who tend to be the ones who are going to be the self-starters and start businesses and lead businesses. But they sometimes, freezers can compartmentalize their emotions. There's nothing wrong with compartmentalizing. That's how we get things done, stuffing emotions. A lot of first responders, military, healthcare tends to do this as well because we need to be action focused. The problem is when we stuff negative emotions, we also stuff positive unintentionally. And so we can become emotionless or a bit numb. And that can be a way that we create a lot of disconnection in our lives with ourselves and others. Another type of freezer is the one that sort of just crashes. When things get too much, they just sort of crash on the couch and they're completely unproductive. The first type of freezer is the one that's hard to sort of, I hesitate to use the word diagnose because it sounds medical, but the one to self-identify because they go, what problem? I don't have any problem, because they don't really recognize it. Then we have the pleaser. This is the one that's really other focused, right? This is the one that's super empathetic, very other person centered, but they tend to be driven out of a place of uncertainty with themselves, fear, imposter syndrome. And so they take on more and more and they say yes, yes, yes. And then they have no boundaries. And then ironically take on more stress in the face of stress. It's kind of an interesting one, but they're out there. And then we have the negative self-talker. That's sort of the other side of my world is, to me, the runner and negative self-talker for me go hand in hand. That's the one who's going to immediately, when they experience a stressful situation, turn the mirror on themselves and they're going to start attacking. They're attacking their worth, their identity. I'm not good enough. I'm not cut out for this. Imposter syndrome lives here too, but in a different way. Deep-seated, a lot of hyperboles. I am this, or I'll never do this. And it's always me-centered, not you-centered, like a fighter. Like, let me tell you what you did. This is about, let me tell you who I am. Not what I did, not behavior. Who I am at my core is just not enough, or whatever the story is there. And all of these personalities have those stories, but a little exacerbated with negative self-talker. the distracted stress personality, that's the one who feels their stress very cognitively. Maybe it's not high emotion, but very cerebral. Mental fatigue is like the kind of the marker for this. Cognitive fog, trouble thinking straight, articulating their thoughts. Their head feels really full, maybe headaches, and they really have trouble focusing and being productive. Then you have the thriver. That's that last one. And that is that person sort of we all strive to be, right? We just, in the face of stress, we're graceful and we're reflective and we have our strategies. It's not that they don't have one of these other stress personalities. They just recognize it very quickly and they can redirect very quickly. They have this whole growth formula spot on. Stress plus recovery equals growth. They know how to reframe stress as opportunities for growth. I mean, they've just got it figured out. Probably I know maybe two people in my whole world that are tried and true thrivers, but we all hope to be that person more of the time. Not all of the time, that's impossible, but just more of the time. And I want to throw one more thing in before I'm quiet. And that is all of these stress personalities, when not managed effectively, can really drive us to fall out of alignment with our values, our vision. We can start making decisions from a place of, not from a place of our values, anchored in values, from a place of self-preservation and fear and uncertainty, and in different ways. All of these stress personalities are different. So I might make a decision for my business out of fear and avoidance and not take a risk as a runner, where a fighter might make a hasty decision and act too quickly. And so you see how it could really impact us as leaders to not have awareness in this area of what our default is. And that realization for me personally was huge for how I run my business. I have to be extremely self-reflective when I have a quick decision to make of, am I making this decision with my stress personality? Or am I making it from a place of who Lauren really is in her, when she's living into her values and she's anchored in the organization's mission? And those are two really big different places to be. And it's we're talking about intuition here, and it's really difficult to do that if I don't remove myself and recover in a way I need to, and then come back to it. Just that moment of pause. It's a gift and it's a skill. And it's resilience is a skill that we can build. And so I just want to throw that out there because I want people thinking about, how am I making decisions for the business? How am I responding to situations? Is it coming from this place, or is it coming from a place of values and purpose?
There's so much in this, Lauren. So I'm gonna kind of try and wrap this piece up so that we can make this practical for our listeners. So through my own learning to become a Wim Hof method instructor, we were taught and we learned about the autonomic nervous system, which we all have, the parasympathetic, which people will know as your rest and digest, or the sympathetic part of our nervous system, which is the fight, flight, freeze, all of which have a role to play. But if we're in one, and particularly for high achievers who tend to be in their sympathetic, are activating their sympathetic nervous system, and I know that on a personal basis. I measure the tonality of my kind of nervous system through the HRV on the Oura ring, and so what I've heard is that the sympathetic elements, part of our autonomic nervous system, we commonly refer to as fight, flight, freeze. And you have eloquently kind of broken that into eight constituents, or eight personalities. And the ultimate goal here is to, number one, become aware of the fact that you're actually operating right now in this personality, in your kind of sympathetic nervous system, and be aware that may not be effective right now if we're making a big decision about the
Hmm.
future trajectory of the company, because from a cognitive perspective, we're operating with less cognitive capacity in that particular state. So it's that having that level of awareness to understand that the state or the personality that you're currently operating from, and be very mindful of the decisions that you're now making if you're operating within that given state. And I always encourage people, just at a practical level, if they have received it, a stimulus by virtue of a perceived threat, maybe they've lost a tender, maybe a key employee has just resigned, uh, a piece of news that we're waiting for has turned out to be quite negative, that rather than responding or reacting to that immediately, is to kind of apply the 24-hour rule, to take time
Hmm.
to reflect, digest, and then if there's a response required, to respond then. Of course, that's not required if somebody's just collapsed on your factory floor and
Hmm.
they need you to act. So that's me trying to bring together what you have articulated really eloquently. What I'd love to do is just to take a few moments to, I suppose, use myself as a case study, because as you're chatting through the stress personalities, I certainly can resonate with the fighter,
Hmm.
um, wanting to defend and demonstrate my rightness. And I've done that quite a lot over the years, where regardless of the shrapnel that ends up in people as a result of me demonstrating my rightness, I can walk away and go,
Mm.
yeah, I'm right there in this situation. So if we kind of, if you wish to explore that personality with me in the context of the, for the benefit of the listeners, to take me from that kind of fighter personality more to the thriver, which we all, I feel, aspire to be.
How to do that.
Yeah.
Well, can I, you said something that really resonated. I feel like it's important to touch on, and then I'm gonna help you with your fighter personality here. You said that you're talking about sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system and gaining better control, and that I think what you're getting at is, from a physiological perspective, when we're in fight or flight, which we can be in for an entire day, right? I mean, we don't experience one stress in isolation. Our whole world is stressors and demands, especially in our worlds. And we no longer have, if we don't manage it, if we don't train in this way, we no longer have complete control of that new brain, the cognitive, the space for decision making, rationale, logic, reason, innovation, analysis. Our primitive brain has taken over. That's where that fight or flight or freeze or appease place lives, is that primitive brain. And we are talking a lot about recovery, but one thing you said that really resonated with me, and it actually goes back to talking about your fighter personality, is we also have opportunity to train and grow capacity to gain control in those moments. Do we have control over fight or flight? No, we don't want that, really. I mean, it keeps us alive, right? If you step in front of a car, you want your fight or flight part of your brain to activate immediately. It's always going to be there. Stress personality is always there. But can we gain better control? Absolutely. And this is where a lot of these interesting human performance podcasts get in, Huberman Lab and all of these ice baths and all the fun, trendy research that's out there right now. All of it is really training ourselves, and this is what our NASA astronauts are doing, and this is what our Navy SEALs are doing, is training for greater cognitive control and focus in moments of extreme fight or flight. So we can also embed those training processes into our day, so that we have control over stressors in our lives. And we could go down a rabbit hole of, actually, a little bit of acute stress is really good for us and helps us focus. We could go there, but going back to the fighters feel their stress very physiologically. And so your experience of stress is probably going to be more physical than maybe someone who has more of an emotional reaction to stress. And so I say that because with a fighter, physiology first is the biggest thing. So if I'm supporting you or you're supporting you, that would be the one thing you want to get to first. Try and tell a fighter to calm down and see what happens to you. And I hope you have the shield to armor yourself in protection. But what if you said, hey, let's take a quick walk, or maybe let's take 5 minutes and get a breather, whatever it was. It's a little bit harder to help a fighter, but it's very easy for a fighter to train themselves to intervene on themselves. But nonetheless, if I'm going to be supporting you, that's where I'm going to ask you to go first, is physiology, because you're really heavily into the fight and fight or flight in that moment. A deep breath is one of the best things you could give yourself, because that long exhale is triggering the release of acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter that is designed to calm the heart rate and bring about what you were talking about, the parasympathetic or the rest and digest phase of fight or flight. So a couple of deep breaths, getting outside and walking. Movement is one of the most incredible interventions for stress. Shaking it all out, jumping jacks, whatever it is, or sometimes I just need to lay down and breathe, whatever it might be. Physiology first, and then you want to help a fighter get tapped back into their values, because as I said before, very values driven people, very strong sense of right or wrong. Maybe their reaction in the moment isn't serving them well, or others. But if you can tap them back into why they're feeling the way that they are, what's the root here? And I put a couple of sentence stems and reflective exercises in the book for that particular situation, but asking them to get really to the root of the anger, because the anger is it's just at the surface. What's underneath is usually something connected back to their values, feeling like something is in violation of their values. And so if you could get them, second layer of this, but I wouldn't try and lead with that. I would try and get them to take that deep breath and calm it down a little bit first. Just truly, and I mean this in the most non-disrespectful way, but truly our fighter is a little like our collective fight or flight is a little bit like a toddler. We have to treat ourselves a little bit like a toddler and get them to calm down before we try and talk any sense into them. And that's just that's one example of how we would intervene on a stress personality. And a fighter was a great one for you to pick, because I think that they're so values driven and action focused. You just want them to be able to harness that and be able to temper the reactionary, the first initial reactions, and then be able to leverage everything else that's packaged in there. That's such a powerful person. And they're going to be your go-to for solving quick problems quickly and making effective, quick decisions. Actually, I think that's the greatest asset on your team, personally, is the fighter personality.
I think you've been a fly on the wall in my life for the last 20 years in terms of what you just summed up there. Kind of reflecting back now, I'm 49, but I'll be 49 this year. It's no accident that I spent kind of more than 25 years in martial arts. I needed kind of that outlet at the end of a busy day, and I used to find different taekwondo gyms wherever I would travel. I remember joining a martial arts gym whenever we had large projects in Qatar, and I needed that, but I found I kind of couldn't sustain that as I got into kind of my mid and later 40s, and hence the discovery of the Wim Hof method, and it was just a revelation, being able to create that gap between stimulus, which was typically followed by a reaction, a fight reaction, and now just through the breath work, and not always, but more typically than not, being able to measure a response because of the awareness around the power of the brake acting as the power of the breath rather acting as a brake pedal, rather than kind of when you've received that stimulus that you want to react to, that I used to put more foot on the gas as opposed to applying the brake pedal. So this again, it resonates so strongly. So what we're saying is, in all of these things, it's just becoming aware that in the context of leading our businesses as leaders, back to the the approach of leading self first before you lead others, before you lead an organization. It's you having mastery, or certainly seeking to have mastery over yourself and the state in which you're prone to operate from in highly stressful situations, and then discerning whether that state actually serves what you're about to do or not.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
That's what I'm hearing, Lauren. Uh, conscious of time. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on before we move into or close? I have a few other questions that I want to just pick up on, but in relation to the stress personalities and giving your knowledge of our typical listenership, which are business leaders operating across the globe at different maturity levels in terms of their scaling journey. Anything else you want to share about the stress personalities?
Yeah, two quick things. One is, like our fighter, anger is not something to be conquered. Stress is not something to be, there's no finish line here that we just all of a sudden we just get that. I was talking about this on a podcast last week. We don't get a graduation certificate here that says, good news, you're a thriver. It's never going to be a problem for you. We're not conquering our anger and our negative self-talk. We're getting to know it. And there's a really big difference. I think there's an element of grace and acceptance that comes with really knowing that there's parts of you that maybe you're not serving you well in the moment, but there's still nonetheless a skill. There's something that you can leverage there. I'm a runner, I avoid, but you know what? I'm really good at boundaries and creating space between me and making a decision. Now that I have better control and awareness, I can see that. So I just don't want people coming into this thinking, I can't wait to conquer this part of me that is holding me back. It's not. It's the lack of awareness that's holding me back. And so being aware and being able to intervene, and like you said, closing the gap between reaction and response, that's a thriver skill. Not solving, not never reacting. Because again, going back to it, stress is a good thing. It helps us grow. It helps us reach new heights. That being said, as leaders, how do we leverage this as leaders? Know that not everyone shows up the same way you do. We tend to get stuck in a world where everything revolves around us, and we assume everyone experiences the same things we do, and they don't. And so how do you nurture a very diverse team of people who might be experiencing stress differently? Regular check-ins, asking, getting curious, giving them autonomy to do things the way they need to grow their capacity to recover how they need to, and regularly checking in on, are my business operations and workflow working for everybody? We have very big, busy sprints in parts of our routine. For example, budget seasons and year ends are working hard to get a deal closed, but then is everybody able to recover after that? How are meetings conducted? All of those questions, that curiosity is a big part of being a leader. So I just wanted to make sure I'm throwing that in there, because there's a big section in the book on interactions between all these personalities and how do we manage them, whether we're leading a family or a business or whatever it is. It's important for us to have that empathy and awareness of each other too, not just ourselves.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up on that in a little moment, but I want to just explore a little bit more about the negative self-talker, and to give you a little bit of context. Lack of ambition of the leader is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why SME leaders do not scale their business. And when you lift the lid on what lack of ambition actually means, I've discerned that it's two things. One is ignorance. I don't know how. I've got to hear, and really, I've arrived at a place where I'm comfortable and I don't know how to scale from here. So one is ignorance. The other is unchallenged limiting beliefs. The negative self-talk, I'm not really an entrepreneur. Maybe I believe I'm not even worthy of the success that I've already enjoyed. Maybe I am fearful of judgment, fearful of criticism, fearful of failure. Can you speak to this stress personality and diffuse this and get more towards the thriver accelerator type personality.
Mm. Yeah, what a driver though, right? Of lack of ambition or growth in a company. That's a real, I've never thought about it that way, but that's such a great point and perspective, and definitely something that when I'm working with clients, I see there's a red thread there. They tend to have a story that's getting in the way, which I'm sure that you loved Dr. Lair's Power of Story book. Again, just one of those books you read that changes everything, and highly recommend it to people. And that process is painful sometimes, but I think so effective, is to get to know the stories that are preventing you from really thriving. And sometimes that goes both ways. Sometimes it's not just that we don't think we're enough. Sometimes we think we're too much. And that's another one. We have to face that truth. Sometimes my ego story at the heart, the cardiologist, I had blinders on, that I thought I was just so resilient and doing everything right. So there's two ways to look at that. Recognizing, and that's why I said at the very beginning, regular reflection and check-in, pulse checks on ourselves is such a powerhouse skill. And I think for the negative self-talker in particular, I said I was really big fan of data, and I mean that. Checking in with our story, but also checking in with what we know to be true. What is true? What are the facts here? Is an important part of that process to build confidence. I love affirmations and things like that. I think that they work, but I also want to nod to the fact that they're not a catch-all for really powerfully driven beliefs in our past. I think there's good exercises we can do in kind of mining why we feel certain ways. What was that message maybe from parents or past experiences that could be informing our story today, that story that's creating a barrier. So maybe a little bit of that, digging into the past to help explain the current, maybe just not getting stuck there. And then how do we retell that story using the data, what we know to be true? And another element too, if you're lucky enough to have this in your life, is having some trusted advisors, some confidants that can really be there to lift you up. And I was talking about this on LinkedIn the other day. Having a tribe for me of women in business is so helpful to me, because they check me along the way. Hey, are you making the decision, from a place of fear? And are you, I hear that negative self-talker in you. I mean, having those people in your life personally, but also professionally, who know your profession and know what it's like to be a business owner or leader, so critical. So having those either mentors or friends or peers is another element. That way we're getting external and internal data. And that's how we really can start to see the whole picture and retell the story, face the truth. So that would be my recommendation for a negative self-talker. But really, honestly, for any of us stress personalities, we've all got stories and they get in our way. So I think it's just should be part of our regular growth process. The building capacity part is to seek that feedback from ourselves and others.
Yeah, I love that. Checking in on our own stories. Dr. Lear mentioned the quality of our lives is ultimately determined by the tone and content of our inner voice.
I love that.
And it's so powerful. And that's, you're reaffirming that again, Lauren, in terms of the importance of checking in on that story. And for those participants in our own ScaleX Accelerator program, I always highlight the fact that, belief in your scaling ambition, in your vision, is so critically important. Of course, belief needs confidence, confidence needs evidence. And we can use the arbitrary kind of multiple of 10xing your business in the context of scaling. People get that in the context of that's significant. And when you say that to people, business leaders, about the potential of 10xing their business, kind of they look with this really despondent face, and you can see the worry lines already. I say, well, simply divide your revenue number by 10, because you've already done it. Whether you're currently turning over, $500,000, at some point you were at $50,000, so you have 10x. If you're turning over $5 million, you were at some point you were at $500,000. If you're turning over $50 million, at some point you were at 5 million, and
I love that.
you've already 10x. The evidence is there, and you cannot dispute the fact that you've already done it. So what's different when you hear it now? So having that evidence, and that evidence being supported by the tribe of people that you surround yourself in, and I tip my hat to all female entrepreneurs. We see it. I'm blessed. I have a wonderful co-founder, Claire, who's just an amazing female entrepreneur. But what we see in our own accelerator program is less than 10% of those who come into our program are actually females. So, you know, females have the challenge of finding certainly other female entrepreneurs who will resonate with the challenges and empathize and understand with the challenges, but also importantly provide that support and champion and cheerlead other females. So that's just the, you know, the data suggests that it's 10% out there who are actually female entrepreneurs. So there is that additional challenge. I've loved this conversation. I cannot believe the time. I could spend another couple of hours exploring this, Lauren. It's gone too quickly. Let me ask one further question before I move into our close, and it's about the importance of the environment. You've referenced it in the context of female entrepreneurship and finding your tribe. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners in the context of environment and the importance of environment in relation to supporting people to thrive?
Well, yes. And you asked me a question before we started about timeless takeaways. So this is one of them. But
no, I'm going to come to that.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna give you one now then, Brendan, because it's what's on my mind, and it always is on my mind. Is these are wonderful, great skills that we're building in the moment, building our tool belt, growth skills and recovery skills and awareness skills. But I think it's easy to forget that we can automate our resilience. We can. It is something that we can do. We create standard operating procedures for our company, and we fail to do the same for ourselves. And I think that it's important to, like I told you at the very beginning, when I went to that cardiologist, it really forced me to look at my calendar and how I run my business, how I run my life. And I don't just have my business to worry about. I have 2 teenage boys, and I have a house to run, and I have a dog. You can probably hear walking in my background. I apologize. And you know, there's a lot going on, and I wasn't managing it right. So I want to say that resilience is a skill. It is an automated. If we can automate some of this, we should, and we can, and we should. And however you do that, do it. But calendar management that we talked about before is such a powerhouse skill that I think all of us should be integrating, and not just for the business, but reflection time and family time and exercise time. And when are clients allowed to reach you? When are teammates allowed to reach you? What are you going to do about those international calls? When are they allowed to get there? How much travel are you willing to put in? All of that has to be, of course, grounded in what is the most important thing. You know, what is the non-negotiable, and you have to decide what those boundaries are, and you decide on them based on what your values are, what your purpose for life is, what your purpose for work is. So as much as I want to grow my company, there's still non-negotiables. I have boys in my home that need me more than ever for the next 5 years. And then maybe I can decide to accelerate some of that growth, travel a little bit more, et cetera, or not. But anyway, I can't make those decisions if I'm A, operating from a place of my runner personality, and B, if I'm not pausing to be really reflective and strategic about how I build my life. I don't want to be reactive every single day and, you know, close my career and sell this business really successfully, but I have, you know, heart disease, and I am tired, and I have no relationship with my husband at the end of my career. That's not my goal. So I'm prioritizing and triaging what are my boundaries, excuse me, what are my goals, and I'm making decisions from there. So we can automate all of this, and resilience becomes a byproduct of the processes and systems that we have in place. It's such an important um, notion that I don't want the listeners to leave without.
That is so powerful and a beautiful segue into, yes, our closing tradition. I always invite our guests to share with our audience 3 timeless takeaways. You provided us with such a powerful first one. Can you share, Lauren, with our listeners 2 other timeless takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the first one, automate these processes. And actually, what made me think of it was listening to one of your other podcast episodes with that Michael Michalowicz, and he said, I wrote it down. Growth is achieving more results with more effort, where scaling is achieving more results with less effort. And I thought that's exactly what I'm trying to say when I say resilience can be automated. Is how do we make this less effortful for ourselves? And in that way, I think we can scale our businesses significantly when we're taking this variable out of having to take care of ourselves. The second one is that stress is a fixed variable. It's not going anywhere. Let's just face that truth. And we don't necessarily want it to. It's good for us. So how can we integrate ways to recover and grow that help us and not hold us back? And then the last one is about those stories. It's just such a powerful game changer for me personally, and for me from a business perspective, is having better awareness and control of my mindset. And that comes with the regular reflective practices and journaling and pulse checks that I think we should be all integrating. And those are the takeaways: is how can we automate resilience through calendar management systems, processes, et cetera? How can we recognize that stress is the fixed variable, but capacity is not? We can always grow capacity through recovery and growth strategies. And then how can we regularly check in on the stories that could be getting in the way of growth and regular recovery? A lot of people will tell me, I'm too busy for that. I don't have time for meditation. And I think, wow, I'm too busy not to integrate that into my day. So it's a different way of looking at it. And I hope that people can check in with those stories on a regular basis.
Those are so powerful, Lauren. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation today. I was
Same.
excited to have it, and you've absolutely delivered so much value to our listeners. What's next for you and performance on purpose?
Oh, scaling, Brendan, is what's next for
I
us.
know somebody who can help you with that.
I do. You might have an email coming soon. No, it is scaling. It's adding to the team. It's growing. We have a 5-10 year plan, and that is the goal. And also this year, it might sound hypocritical, but not necessarily attached to an outcome. It might sound contradictory, I should say, to that goal, but it's really helped me not to get too over zeroed in on a particular way to grow and scale. And so I'm really exploring that in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I love that, and we'll chat off air about the next steps there. Lauren, look, I want to really thank you for your time, your energy, your wisdom, the sharing of your incredible expertise today. I wish you every success. I encourage everyone to go out and grab a copy of Less Stress, More Calm, discover your unique stress personality and make it your superpower. I've loved this book because it's given me permission to absolutely deface it. I've lines all over this. I've
Oh,
filled in the
thank you.
questionnaires along. I really love a book that encourages you to interact with it along the way. So it's one that I need to come back to. But I wish you every success. Thank you for taking the time
Thank you.
to write it, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome.